Welcome to Film at 50, a podcast that celebrates semi-centennials in the world of cinema. I'm your host, Brian Rowe, and I'm thrilled to welcome Harrison Blackman back to the podcast today to talk about The Panic in Needle Park, starring a very young Al Pacino, released 50 years ago in July of 1971. How are we doing, Harrison?
Doing much better than the people in this movie, I think.
How far into this movie were you like, okay, this is not going to be the most entertaining film I watched this year?
Well, I don't think that's what you're going in knowing. It's called The Panic in Needle Park. It's not called like Little Orphan Annie.
The Panic at the Disco.
Right. Yeah. Not that kind of panic.
That would have been fun too.
It's like, you know how there's the addict subplot of The Wire?
Yeah.
And you know how that's also the least fun part of The Wire? Well, this is like that, but it's the whole movie. And it's
all
really,
2 hours of it.
Really depressing. Yeah. But relevant today. For sure.
Had you heard of this film before? The last couple weeks I mentioned it to you. Had you heard of this one?
No, this was new to me. But it's interesting to see young Al. I also went back and watched Serpico this week too.
Oh, you did? Great film.
More young Al. And kind of how that deviates from what we know him at when he became old Al in the 90s, and his voice changed a lot.
Okay, so what year did he become old Al? Was it like 91?
Yeah, probably like with like Scent of a Woman or something.
Scent of a Woman.
Yeah.
Well, he's made up to look really old in Dick Tracy from 1990, where he's the villain. Like he has like a weird makeup job. And so
they all look weird.
That's the first film I ever saw him in, because I was born in 84. And so I didn't see it in a theater, but I remember I watched Dick Tracy on home video, and that was my introduction to Al Pacino. And I'm like, who is this guy? And then you're like, oh, okay, that's not what he really looks like. Like they did a fantastic makeup job on him in that movie. But yeah, growing up, he was always old guy until I discovered his work of the 70s, like Godfather and Dog Day Afternoon. And The Panic in Needle Park is before even The Godfather, everyone. Yeah. Godfather came out in March of 72. Panic in Needle Park came out in July of 71. This is his first major role in a movie, as we will talk about. Before we get to more of our opinions about the film, Harrison, I thought I'd just give our listeners a brief rundown of what the movie's about, and I've got some really interesting trivia and some research I did on this film. So just very briefly, this film tells of heroin addicts who hang out at a place called Needle Park in New York City. This is the early 70s, of course. Particularly Bobby, a small-time hustler played by Al Pacino, and Helen, a homeless girl played by Kitty Wynn, who finds stability in a relationship with Bobby. I mean, over the course of the film, we're introduced to other characters. Really, this is like a two-person movie. Like, it's really these two characters and their relationship, breaking up, getting back together. Like, it's a lot of that for almost the full 2 hours. But things take a turn for the worst as Helen and Bobby become more and more addicted, leading to a series of betrayals, as we find at the end of the film. Anything else you want to add to that? I mean, we have other, characters in this. Raul Julia made his film debut in this movie. It's just, 2 scenes? I mean, it's very brief, but I was like, it's funny, like, I know him from the Addams Family movies, and this is 20 years before that, and I'm still like, you can tell it's him right away. Like he doesn't look that different from the 90s in this movie, which was also kind of interesting. So some background information I have about the film. As you said, Joan Didion and John Gregory Dunn wrote the screenplay to this. So The Panic in Needle Park was based on a 1966 novel by James Mills. The screenplay was written by wife and husband team. They were a wife and husband screenwriting team, Joan Didion and John Gregory Dunn. They would also go on to write the screenplays to 1976's A Star is Born, as well as the 1996 Up Close and Personal with Robert Redford and Michelle Pfeiffer. They're also, of course, well known for their other writings. I mean, Joan Didion is a very famous writer of fiction, of nonfiction. She won the National Book Award for the Year of Magical Thinking in 2005, 2006, that era. And she also won the National Medal of Arts presented by Barack Obama in 2013. So it's like, this is an interesting duo. Like, they're not just screenwriters, they do a lot in their long careers.
Yeah, and it's not just like those screen credits. From what I've read, they also did a lot of like punch ups that they weren't credited for.
Mm-hmm.
But also, like, watching this now, I was thinking about how Joan Didion had written about like hippies and like slouching towards Bethlehem. This is one of her famous essays. Mm-hmm. And Joan Didion often takes a kind of scathing look at like different places or different people. And it was interesting to see her, because in those types of journalistic pieces, she is often like criticizing like people who do drugs and stuff. But in this movie, it's more like humanizing them and being way more sympathetic than she might have been in some of her journalistic pieces.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I read her book, The Year of Magical Thinking. A lot of that was inspired by the death of her husband, right? And she was kind of working through her grief in that book. And it's one of the most powerful books I've ever read. It's amazing. Like it was one of those, like, I had heard about it for a few years and I had looked at some of her books before, but that's the one that's always really stuck with me. And, I forget sometimes that, oh yeah, they were also screenwriters long ago. As early as in the 90s with, Up Close and Personal. That was a huge movie from 96. So yeah, they were working for a long time.
Yeah. Quite a career.
And I did look her up. She is still with us. She is, I believe, in her late 80s. She's still with us, Joan Didion. So The Panic in Needle Park was directed by Jerry Schatzberg. I think that's how you say it.
Yeah, Jerry Schatzberg.
Jerry Schatzberg.
Everyone knows him.
Yeah, you're not a big Schatzberg film connoisseur. Like, you haven't seen everything he's ever directed.
Oh no, I've got it all on Blu-ray. Yeah.
You have his he's got some obscure films from the 80s. Like, almost every film he directed has at least one major star. Like, I looked up his films from the 80s that I'd never heard of, and one has like Gene Hackman. And I'm like, I've never heard of this. But each one, he got big name talent for his films. But his first film was right before this, came out in the fall of 1970, Puzzle of a Downfall Child, starring Faye Dunaway, a film I almost did an episode about. It's like really weird. I actually watched it before I made the decision, and I wasn't that into it. And I'm like, it's so obscure. I don't think people are going to care about this one. Because I do want to do an episode on a Faye Dunaway movie, because I love her work. So we'll get to her. My listeners, at some point, Faye Dunaway will be the main topic of an episode. She's in so many films of the early 70s. We will get to her. But so after that, he directs this film. This is his second film. He reunited with Al Pacino in 1973 for Scarecrow. So Pacino had two films in 73. One of them is Serpico. And then he's also in Scarecrow, which when I was younger, I'd always get those two films confused because they're the same year, one word, start with an S, sound the same. Right? And I believe Scarecrow also stars Gene Hackman, right? I think I might have seen that when I was younger. I think I've watched Scarecrow. I know I've seen Serpico. That I've seen a couple times. But I remember Scarecrow being really great too. I'm excited to get to that soon on the podcast. He would also direct films like The Seduction of Joe Tynan, starring Alan Alda and Meryl Streep, Honeysuckle Rose, and a great flick called Street Smart with Morgan Freeman and Christopher Reeve. Check that one out, Harrison, if you haven't seen that one. That's from 87. And then he has some other obscure films starring some big name talent I have not seen or heard of. Those are the ones I had heard of. Mr. Schatzberg, who I also looked up, and he's like in his early 90s. He's also still with us, which is awesome. Very good. Let's see. Robert De Niro read for the part of Bobby, but director Schatzberg had already decided on Pacino. This is really weird. Did you see this on IMDb?
Like, I didn't see that, no.
Schatzberg said no to this movie, Panic in Needle Park. He said, they offered it to him. He said, no, I'm not interested. And then when Al Pacino got involved or like auditioned or something, then Schatzberg was like, okay, I want to make this movie with Pacino. But Pacino, like, who is he in 1970 when they shot this? Like, he had been in one movie before this, 1969's Me, Natalie, in a very, very brief role. So I'm like, was he known from the stage? Like, how do you even fund a movie like this when you have no names of any kind? Like, he comes in and Schatzberg changes his mind, says, no, actually, I want to do this movie with Pacino. I just found that really interesting. That would be hard to do today, I think, to like, take a gamble on a no-name actor in a lead role in a movie. It's a different world today.
I guess what that suggests is that Al's charisma and presence was so strong that Schatzberg was like, I gotta work with this guy.
This guy's extraordinary. And before even Coppola, Schatzberg's like, there's something to this Pacino. Like, I think he could become something, and I think he'd be great for this movie. And so good on you, Schatzberg. You saw something in Pacino before a lot of other directors might have, right? Let's see. This film marked the film debut of both Kitty Wynn, who plays the female lead, and Raul Julia, which I mentioned before. And as I said, Pacino had only been briefly in one movie before this. Pacino's performance in this film made Francis Ford Coppola want to use him in The Godfather. Coppola saw this. Now, I'm like, when was The Godfather film? Because it came out in March of 72. Panic in Needle Park came out in July of 71. I feel like that would have been too late for Coppola to see it and then cast him in The Godfather. I'm like, did they shoot The Godfather after July of 71? I mean, I would assume it was probably early in 71. So maybe he got an early cut. It played at the Cannes Film Festival in May. So maybe, I don't know. I was like, the timeline doesn't quite match up for me there.
Yeah, well, this is an aside, but I also saw in a weird trivia that seemed dubious that Jim Morrison also wanted to be in this movie.
Now, is that what I read was Joan Didion and John Gregory Dunn went to talk to him about the movie.
Right.
Was it Jim Morrison was interested in doing it, or the screenwriters were thinking of him for the lead role and wanted to persuade him to do it or something? I couldn't tell which way it was going there.
Right, but either way, Schatzberg was set on Pacino, and I mean, Morrison does fit the profile of a substance abuser.
I don't know if Jim Morrison did he ever act in a film? Like, did he play a role in a movie, not himself, like someone else? I don't know if he ever did. That would have been interesting. This was
his chance to do like A Hard Day's Night, right?
Yeah. Oh, there you go. Yeah. So this could have been Jim Morrison. It could have been Robert De Niro. But, we ended up with Al Pacino. It worked out, right? I mean, I cannot imagine film without Al Pacino. Like, just the 70s. Take out everything else. Like from 72 to 77. Like, there's like some just spectacular films that Al Pacino did there. And I'm like, so if he had not done Panic in Needle Park, it's very well probable he would not have been in The Godfather. So this is a very important film in the history of cinema. The Panic in Needle Park.
It's a domino for sure.
It is, that's often the case. There'll be an actor, they have a role in a small film that maybe somehow gets them an Oscar nomination or something. And then that leads 2 years later, usually, to like a big role in a movie. And you're like, that they would have gone with someone else. If they hadn't have made that small film. Jennifer Lawrence is a great example of that. She does Winter's Bone in 2010, this very small movie, premieres at Sundance. That movie could have gone nowhere, but it's so strong and she's so great in it. And then that led to an Oscar nomination. And then that leads to more and more opportunities. I mean, sometimes all it takes is that one early film, the right place at the right time, and it can really make a star out of somebody. And that's definitely the case with Al Pacino here too. So Coppola also, Panic in Needle Park is important because Paramount was not so on board with this newcomer Al Pacino to be in The Godfather, and Coppola also showed Panic in Needle Park to Paramount executives to prove to them that Pacino could play Michael Corleone in The Godfather. Like, he also used the movie to like show other people, no, he can do this. Just watch his performance here. I don't think Me, Natalie would have been enough. His probably 3 minutes in that first. I think they needed to see like a full blown movie performance for 2 hours to go, okay, we'll take a chance on this guy. But I think it was kind of touch and go at the beginning there. I think they wanted anyone else to be Michael Corleone. I don't know. I'm excited to do the research on The Godfather. I'm not exactly sure about. I know Coppola was almost fired a few times. I mean, it was like the production of The Godfather is just as interesting as the movie in some ways. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think what this movie does show about Pacino's skill as an actor is that there are a lot of scenes, where he's really quiet, but then he amps it up and gets loud. And that's in those early movies like Dog Day Afternoon and like Godfather, the first two, like he modulates between quiet and loud really effectively. And then I think in the 90s, maybe he lost some of that modulation and just was a little bit more yelly. But depended on the role, right? But
maybe it was the role, yeah.
But it's interesting. And I think there are shades of Michael within this character.
Yeah, that's a great point. I was thinking that too while watching it the other night. It was like there are shades to Michael in his role in this film in Panic, because he does have moments of quiet and sweetness. Like there's a shot of them in bed together and they're just like under the covers talking. It's very sweet. But then there's moments where he's really mad, and you can see some elements of Corleone in both part 1 and part 2 there. And you're like, okay, I can see why Coppola looked at this and said, I think there's something there. I think he could pull this off, because he is so young, he's so sweet, but he takes on this kind of this darker, grittier role in Panic at Needle Park. If he had done, instead of this movie, like some low-key romantic comedy or something for 71, again, I don't think Godfather happens with Al Pacino. Like this was the exact kind of film he needed to do at this point in time. So interesting how that all works out. So a couple other things. The film was banned in the UK for 4 years because of its graphic depiction of drug taking. And then this really freaked me out, Harrison. Do you know what this movie is rated in the US? The MPA rating.
Isn't it like an X or something?
It's PG.
Oh, really? Well.
So, did you see that? So originally, upon release, it was rated R. And then they later edited the film, took out some profanity and drug use, and they resubmitted it, and it got a PG rating. I don't know when that was, but I'm like,
the MPAA only cares about profanity, right? That's the only thing they care about.
Yeah. So this movie is rated PG. I could see some like fifth. I could see some 5th grade teacher. Looking for PG films for his students, like, oh, an early Pacino, it's rated PG, let's put this on for the 11-year-old.
I don't think they're gonna put that one on, but also like it's funny that The Temple of Doom was the movie that created PG-13, and not this one. Yeah.
So this movie, I mean, we see close up lots and lots and lots of drug use. A dog dies. A woman's bare breasts are shown in a shot for at least 20 seconds, and there's an F-bomb.
Yeah.
Someone says the F word like halfway through the movie.
To be fair, the dog jumping off the ferry was not very graphic.
That's right.
Poorly edited.
That's right.
Yeah.
It was poorly. It's so amazing to me. It's that part is very poorly edited, not very well done. It's just like running, and then all of a sudden she's like, and then you just cut to the water. I mean, it's not like something out of a Leslie Nielsen comedy. And I still felt sad. I still was like, oh, because then
I didn't feel sad. I thought it was really funny because that would never happen.
A dog does not want to jump off a ferry into the water.
I don't think so.
Well, I think the dog was barking. The dog saw something. Chased it.
No.
Yeah, that seems a little goofy. The film has an 85% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes. It was kind of mixed at the time. Like Roger Ebert, who loved everything in 71, as I have come to find out, gave this movie 3.5 stars out of 4, not 4 out of 4 like the other 800 films he gave that to. 71. It's so funny. I like every movie I look at for the podcast, like I'll look up like, oh, what did Ebert give this? 4, 3. Like, did he not like anything? Back in his early days of film criticism, just everything is fantastic. He said this movie lives and moves, among other things. Gene Siskel, who would go on to pair with him in 75, he gave this film 2 stars and said Panic is little more than a traditional love story set in New York's West Side drug culture. What's really interesting too is Gene Siskel, which I have no access to Siskel's printed reviews anywhere on the web, except Wikipedia often will have like his like a quote from his review. I'm like, who is finding that? Because no one put out any books by Siskel. Like, there's nothing. I'm like, how do you find that stuff? Well, but most of these films Ebert loves, and Siskel gives it thumbs up. So I don't know what that's about.
Well, they have to disagree.
They have to disagree. 4 years before they even start their show, they have to. I mean, they're across the street from each other, right, in Chicago.
Yeah.
And Siskel, Ebert liked another one. Okay, I'm gonna be the cranky critic. Let's do this. And then my last piece of info, I was like, did this get nominated for anything at the Oscars? Nothing there, nothing at the Golden Globes or anything. But the film did screen at the Cannes Film Festival, 1971. It was nominated for the Palme d'Or, which is like their Best Picture award. And Kitty Wynn won Best Actress at the Cannes Film Festival, 1971. So that was kind of interesting. I'm like, okay. They looked at Pacino and they were like, Kitty, give it to her.
Well, for most of the movie, she is like the main character.
That's true. Yeah. And she is a fresh face to me. I meant to look up her filmography. I don't know if like how long her career went, but have you seen her in anything else? Like she was like a fresh face in this. I really enjoyed, if that character had been played by Jane Fonda, someone who was really big in 71, I don't know if I could have got lost in it as I did. I mean, Pacino's really the only figure in this, or maybe like a little Raul Julia here and there, but
there's Paul Sorvino for 5 minutes.
Paul Sorvino. Was it 5 minutes? Wasn't it more like 5 seconds?
5 seconds, yeah. He's there.
I wrote in my notes, briefly. Look, I said, look, it's Paul Sorvino.
I got really excited and then he was gone. Yeah.
Yeah. That was something else I noticed in this movie. A lot of characters would come and go. There are only two that stayed in the film for the whole time. What are your thoughts on the Panic in Needle Park? So you've been on my podcast before. For those of you who haven't listened, we've talked about, in terms of the 70s films, we've talked about 3, and the 2 that you've talked about for 71 are big releases, right? Like THX 1138 and Get Carter. This is a much kind of smaller film. I couldn't really find like how well it did. I mean, I can't imagine a movie like this is bringing in the box office, like everyone and their grandma's like, hey, let's go see Panic in Needle Park. Like, I don't think this movie would have done super well, but this is definitely a little bit more obscure than those other 2 you talked about a few months ago. What did you make of this movie?
Yeah, I found it really interesting because of like the way that it set up Pacino, and also like because of the fact that it was written by Didion and Dunn.
Mm-hmm.
And I had read Didion's like journalism from the 60s before. So trying to connect those dots was interesting. I mean, I think it's really well done. The absence of music is striking because it's quiet. And, plot wise, it all seemed to work for me, but it did feel like maybe 20 minutes too long because that it's not going to end well for them. But yeah, I think it's worth watching if you're interested in the trajectory of Pacino's career and that kind of stuff. And all these addiction things that they were talking about in the 70s. I mean, they're definitely relevant today with the opioid crisis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think those are the 2 reasons to watch it. Really, is just the themes of the film and the subject matter. Still really important today. And then for fans of Al Pacino, this is like essential viewing. You have to see the first thing he did. That he's all over this movie. It's not like he just shows up for a scene or 2 early in his career. Like, this is right before The Godfather. He's one of the 2 leads. And probably the best praise I can give this movie is that Al Pacino is just so charismatic and confident in this movie for being like his first major role in a film. I mean, there's a lot of actors where even some of the best ones, it takes like 3 or 4 films for them to really kind of find their voice in film and in their roles on the screen. And this one, he is just firing on all cylinders in the first major movie. I have not seen his appearance in Me, Natalie from 2 years before, but he is fantastic in this. He's so much fun to watch in this movie. And he's not like so young that it's awkward. Like, he has the same kind of look as he does in The Godfather in terms of his age, but he is just really striking in this, as is Kitty Wynn, who's also strong too. But I feel like if you're kind of on the fence of watching this, do you like Al Pacino? then you have to watch them. Right?
Yeah.
Because I don't know about you, I had a strange reaction to this movie. Of the, gosh, I've looked at like 47, 48 films for the podcast. This was one of the hardest ones to get through for me. Like, I just found it very, very, very slow. And, I'm like, okay, how much longer does this have? Oh, I've watched 40 minutes. Okay, there's more to, but at the same time, it was really weird. I was kind of struggling getting through this one, but at the same time, I was really just in awe of a lot of the filmmaking and the acting, and I admired the hell out of it. But the experience of watching this movie is not an enjoyable one, I found. And and you mentioned the lack of music. I noticed that after a while. I'm like, come on, I don't need a montage, but maybe have a little music. It's so much like a documentary, the way it's put together. And that, again, I admired that. But it's like, I feel like the movie could zip along a little bit more. There's no like real clear direction of where we're going. I mean, my notes in the second half, I'm like, this movie could really end after any of these scenes, and doesn't seem like there'd be that much different.
Plenty of tragedy.
Yeah.
Right. Overdosing. There's going to jail.
Yeah.
There's lots of points where you could be like, oh, that's it. They're dead.
Oh, that's it.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah, but
and even the epilogue scene, I mean, the movie literally cuts to black, and I'm like, oh, that's a dark end. And then it goes back, and then we get one more scene, which actually I thought was beautiful. And like, I was like, gosh, if I had liked this movie more, I think I would have been really emotionally involved in that last scene we get, which I won't spoil.
Yeah.
But but I mean, there's a lot of scenes that land here, some scenes that I think were really great, even though they don't necessarily belong in the movie in terms of like the way they're cut together. I'm thinking specifically of the one where we actually watch them making the drugs, like that part where they're wearing the masks. And that was also triggering to watch people wearing masks. I was like, whoa, what?
Right. Yeah. Well, when they're cutting the brick, right?
Yeah.
That was like, wait a minute. Is this a COVID movie?
50 years before. They predicted it all along. But did you notice that, Harrison? That scene is cut together very fast. There's like quick cuts to close-ups and over here and over. I mean, it goes on for like 4 minutes. And I'm like, so many scenes in this movie have very little cutting, have very much just kind of the camera kind of tracks with the actors. But that scene probably had 100 cuts in 4 minutes. I'm like, huh. So it's a little bit of a preview to Requiem for a Dream 30 years later in this scene, but nowhere else. But I like that scene. It was definitely, have you heard of ASMR? It was giving me some of that. Like the very relaxing vibes of watching them do their job very well. I like that. I might have rewound it and watched it one time. So what else did we like about this film or didn't like? I have some notes I put down here about some scenes. Anything else that was really striking? Any other scenes or moments in the film that you liked?
Yeah. Some of them were kind of interesting, and if they were supposed to be comic or not. Like there's the scene where Kitty becomes a waitress for all of 5 minutes.
That's a great scene.
And then quits.
Yeah. I think don't we get some gay representation in that scene? Like that guy who's asking for the pie. He's kind of flamboyant. We're talking about this a little bit on the podcast. Like I just recorded an episode about Shaft, and there's a scene in that movie where like clearly gay character, he says out loud, "I'm gay," and he's very proud of it. And that's something you're not seeing too much. I mean, you have the Boys in the Band in 1970. And so you're seeing it like a little bit here and there. Shaft, it's a much bigger part. So like looking at these early 70s films, I'm always kind of like looking to see if there's any gay representation of any kind. And here we get that brief little character. I was like, I think he's gay.
Yeah, no, I mean, like this is filming in New York.
In New York.
It's not like when we watched I Never Sang for My Father, that was like totally set, right? But this one is like they're filming like cinema verite kind of stuff in New York. They're filming real New York. And
I love it.
All of its complexities. So that's really cool for the time. And it's an interesting milieu to be in the 70s in Needle Park, like with them the whole time. You're like on the ground.
Yeah. I love the exteriors in this movie, just like I did in Shaft, which is also in New York. A lot of handheld camera work on the streets of New York in 1970. Really cool to kind of see that period flavor in a city that I love, and you get that here also, and it's beautiful. We get scenes of them just like walking down the sidewalk, and you see a lot of the buildings, and I mean, at the time that probably didn't interest very many people, but 50 years on, that's something I love to see, is like the exterior shooting. Like in I Never Sang for My Father, when it's all on a stage, it's interesting because the actors are great, but like in terms of the location stuff, it's not as interesting.
Yeah.
So, but not to say that it's all outside, right? We get a lot of this film at night. A lot of the film is like in apartments. And one of my favorite scenes is when, so she becomes like a prostitute, right, to earn some money, and she beds that very young guy. I mean, how young was that guy? Like, he looked like he was 14, 15. And he looked very young.
Yeah.
and then Bobby comes in, and he's like, "Hey, what are you doing with my woman?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And then he hands him over the wallet, and he just takes all the cash out of it and shoves the kid out the door. And it all was like a ploy, right? It was all like a little game between Bobby and Helen to like get more money than they could have if it had just been her. I like that scene a lot.
Yeah. No, it kind of made me think of there's a scene in The Catcher in the Rye when Holden Caulfield, I believe he calls a sex worker.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, well, this is like that, except this is what would really happen to Holden Caulfield. He would be ripped off. Yeah.
I would love to know what the situation is with that. Can that book ever be made into a film? Like, after the passing of J.D. Salinger, even though he's gone, there's still like, it's still tied up in legal stuff. Like, they cannot make that into. Would you agree that's the most famous book ever written that's never been made into a film? Like,
but I also don't think it's not really a movie I want to watch. So
yeah. Well, it would depend on the director and the actor. I mean, for sure.
I mean, like Franny and Zoe, that would be different. That's a really good book, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's leave Salinger out of the rest of this.
Salinger, do you think he liked this Panic in Needle Park movie?
I don't want to know. Yeah.
We won't go there. Let's see. I liked any moments of levity, right? As I said, this is not the most enjoyable movie to watch. There's long stretches of depression. Like, oh my God. And so any moments that there's some levity, there's like a scene when they're like playing ball on the street outside where Al Pacino's like getting into it. And like, there's some moments where it's like, okay, daylight. There's a smile on Bobby's face. I like it. And it was funny, as I was watching that scene, I just happened to look at IMDb's goofs, and it said, look for a camera and a boom pole like during that scene in the upper right hand corner, and boy, you can see it very clearly for a good 7 seconds. Like, whoever was cutting the movie was on something that day. Because I think I would have noticed it even if I hadn't looked at that. So I like that scene. You didn't like the scene with the dog, huh? Why does she even get a dog? Like, what's that about? She's like, of course the dog's gonna die. I had to
read the Wikipedia synopsis to be like, what just happened there? And
like, it's so random. She just has this little dog, and then it's dead in like 2 minutes.
Yeah, and because we've seen an earlier scene in the movie where they steal a TV and sell it. Yes. To get money to score.
Isn't he just like walking down the sidewalk? He just like grabs it out of the back of a truck or something.
Yeah. So he just randomly shoplifts a TV outside the back of a truck. So I was like, did they steal this dog? And then just as soon as the dog appears, it jumps off the ferry into the Hudson River, which I thought was unlikely. Because I think dogs are smarter than that.
Yeah.
Usually.
This movie does not treat dogs well.
Yeah. Well, there wasn't anything at the bottom that said like dogs were not harmed, right?
You know? Yeah. I don't think you see that as much in the early 70s. Like, if an animal dies at a movie, it's like, what, 50-50 maybe? No.
Well, if it's a Russian movie, it died for real.
It died.
Yeah. Like in Ranjay Rublev, they murder a horse, and it's pretty awful. But
I think about 90% of people who might have watched this movie have just been now turned off of ever watching because we say that a dog died. You don't see the death or anything. It's just
I
like,
think the dog was fine.
I don't think they hurt the dog. I'm almost 100%.
Yeah, they could have put like a dog dummy, like in Anchorman when Jack Black throws Will Ferrell's dog into the San Diego Bay. like it becomes like a dummy that's thrown into the water. I mean, I would have appreciated that if they had
that would have made that
the
would have
splash shot. Yeah.
If they had cut to like a puppet dog like flying into the air and landing in the water, I think my rating would go up even higher. It'd be fantastic.
Oh yeah, for sure.
What do you the director Schatzberg, anything that you notice that he's doing here? I mean, the documentary like style, a lot of handheld. Anything else he did that you thought was interesting as a director?
I mean, it was understated, but it was probably more like the handheld and being in the room with the actors, like when they're in these real apartments. That gave it a verisimilitude that had it been a camera on a tripod the whole time, it wouldn't have been. Right. So
I don't even know how you make a movie like this with a camera on sticks the whole time. It's with Al Pacino. Like, did Al Pacino ever appear in a film where there's no handheld? Like, I feel like you always have to be following him.
Yeah, it's like if you threw Al Pacino in The Maltese Falcon and like instead of Humphrey Bogart, it was him and he's just like yelling at Peter Lorre or something, like that would be weird. And
he could have been in The Maltese Falcon. He was Al Pacino was born in 1940 and Maltese Falcon came out in 41. So we could have had a young Al Pacino.
Yeah, he could have
playing the Humphrey Bogart role.
Yeah.
Playing the Falcon. Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking back, I'm like Martin Scorsese's The Irishman from 2019. I feel like that movie is almost all not on sticks, but like dollies, and I don't feel like that there's much handheld in that movie. So Pacino was able to stay in check a little bit with Scorsese. I guess I don't know.
Well, that movie is a whole another conversation.
Yeah, let's not go down. I mean, we'll talk about Pacino at the end because there's so much to talk about with his 50-year career.
In 70 years, you can talk about The Irishman on your podcast.
That's right.
Yeah.
No, I've joked before. I said, well, if I just keep it going forever, like I will take it to December 2069, January 2070, which would be Film at 50 because it started in 2020. And I would end with like The Irishman and Parasite. Like the end, because I don't want to do the year of COVID where all the movies were pushed back. The year of 2020 is weird. There's not a whole lot of releases.
You don't want to get to Mortal Kombat.
It would be 2070 would be a year we'd have to do like 35 episodes about Tenet, and that wouldn't go so well. So yeah, if I were to take this as long as I possibly could, it'd be the 50th year of Film at 50. We could end with like The Irishman. We could talk about Al again. It could be me and you.
Well, they'll have to de-age us. Yeah.
They'll have to de-age us like in the movie. That's what I would do for the last episode. We would de-age us into looking like we do now.
That software will be freely available.
When I start looking at myself on this Zoom and I'm like, God, I'm looking old. They'll have a feature in the next 10, 15 years. I can just de-age myself and my guests if they choose to partake. That would be great. But before we get to The Irishman, which I'll probably mention again at the end here, anything else? I was a little disappointed in Schatzberg he gives us the bare breasts of a woman. And then later we have a scene with Pacino and a bunch of men in a shower naked, but we only see their backs.
Yeah, I'm going to say that wasn't Schatzberg's. Like, that was probably more the MPAA.
That was more the MPAA. No, but I'm always like, I'm questioning of any director. You're going to show a woman topless in a movie and then have a scene later of the guy naked and they don't show us anything.
Yeah, it's an American movie. So once I went to, it was like a dance performance in Athens, Greece.
Yeah.
And then an usher came to our row because it was a group of students. And I was one of the student group and was like, oh no, you are all Americans? Well, there's a lot of nudity in the show. So we know that you're probably going to be up in arms about this or something. So they warned us. And then, it was like all these dancers, men and women, completely naked for like 2 hours. So yeah, it depends on the cultural context, I think.
Well, here's a case where the MPAA was not scared of nudity because there's a topless woman, PG. Do you think, is that the moment where the 5th grade teacher turns the movie off when the woman's naked?
I think they I'm gonna give the 5th grade teacher the benefit of the doubt that they read the synopsis.
Yeah, exactly.
That it's about, unless it's like supposed to be like a health class or like say no to drugs, like dare kind of stuff.
But there is this like unwritten rule, like PG, you can show it to young kids and stuff. It's like in the 70s, even in the 80s, it's not that simple. Like today, this gets an R. There's no way this gets less than an R today. Right? So I don't know what was going on there. Maybe they were addicted to something at the MPAA the day they rated this PG. I don't know.
Well, Coppola is a family man, and so he might not have been able to watch this if it wasn't a PG family movie.
Maybe they, like Pacino, forced them to re-rate it when like there was talk of Coppola might watch this film and cast me in The Godfather, so can you make it PG? And then Coppola's like, can I make The Godfather PG? Well, let's see. The horse's head. Do we need that much blood? Okay. All right. We'll go with an R rating.
Cartoon. Okay.
We'll keep it off the screen. So the performances. So Al Pacino. So we've talked about him a little bit in this movie. Like, what does he do really well here? Like, how does he sell this character in a way that maybe a lot of other actors at the time might not have been able to do?
Yeah, he's like really charismatic. He's also really frenetic. You can see why Kitty's character like falls for him,
yeah,
even though you're also like maybe you shouldn't fall for him.
He's very handsome in this.
Yeah,
he doesn't look like he's been addicted to drugs since he was 12. Like he looks good.
He looks relatively good for a heroin addict. He's not that thin yet. So I think that all works together. And I think what I said before about his modulation between soft and explosive is like one of his best skills. So
yeah, I love that you get to see all those shades of him. I mean, I wrote it's at the hour mark that we get the first scene of him going berserk. He says to her, "I was gonna marry you." And then what's really weird is I just recorded an episode about Carnal Knowledge with Jack Nicholson. Also, will have aired by now. And that movie also has a scene where Jack Nicholson in the movie, he's been fairly reserved for the most part, but then he just goes berserk on Anne Margaret in the last third of the movie in a really raw scene, and where he's yelling at her to get out of bed, go do something. And in Panic in Needle Park, we get a very similar scene where she's in bed, she's been having a tough few days or however long it's been, and he yells at her to get out of the bed, put some clothes on, take a shower, go do something. And I was like, whoa.
Yeah, I
just saw this scene.
Every actor wanted to do that scene. Like, so can I do a scene where I yell at my significant other, tell her to get out of bed?
It's longer in Carnal Knowledge, but it's very similar. I was like, whoa, that's weird. 2 films that came out the same month. It has a very similar trajectory too, because the first hour, as I said, he doesn't have a lot of scenes where he gets upset or like visibly angry at her, but you get a lot more of that as we get in the second half of the movie. But yeah, he's just great. I mean, there's not a false note from him in this. Did you find, I mean, the moments of sweetness, the moments where he goes berserk on her, the moments, where he's really just like doped up. There's that scene where he's like unconscious and I mean, his character goes through the ringer in this movie, and he is on board. He brings it 110% for sure. Do you think Kitty Wynn deserved to win Best Actress at the Cannes Film Festival?
I thought she was really good.
Yeah. I was like, at first I was like, okay, like it took me a little while to warm up to her, but by the second half, I thought she was really great. And I was like, how come I haven't seen this actress before? I mean, I feel like that's one that should have gone on in the 70s and 80s to do more stuff. And I feel like I haven't seen her in anything else.
Yeah, she was brittle and strong. And you could see how she played the character well enough that you could understand why she was still with him.
Yeah.
Why she became addicted, what her dilemma is now. Like it conveyed all that it needed to convey, because that's without that much acting, like then it would be like, what's happening? Why would a normal person do this?
I mean, that's the only thing that Al Pacino being this movie gives it some drawback, is that I just know him so well.
Right.
I'm seeing Al Pacino and I'm like, God, if that character had been played by an unknown, like I really could have kind of dove into this world. And because Kitty Wynn is such a, such an unknown to me. But even given that, I mean, the best actors, Meryl Streep and some of these, like, they disappear into their roles, and it's working if after a while you forget it's that famous person you're looking at. And I did after a while just believe him as that character. I wasn't all the way through being like, look at Al Pacino, he's so young. Like I got involved in the film and in his story, and
it was different from like Carlito's Way, where you're like, okay, Al.
Isn't that kind of the problem with the 90s and on? Like, he starts to just play a version of Al Pacino in a lot of the films starting in the 90s, whereas in the 70s he's really doing different things. And I mean, he has like, there's a certain temperament to Al Pacino in most of his films, like kind of like Nicholson too. Like if there's not the scene where they go ballistic on somebody, it's not a Al Pacino movie. You're waiting for that at some point. But did Raul Julia, do you think, deserve to be Oscar nominated for his performance in this movie?
No.
He's not in it enough. I wish he had been a part of this more. That was my other big criticism, was I felt like the supporting characters are not fleshed out enough. I feel like there could have been at least a couple more characters in the movie that had more screen time. Julia's in the movie very early on. He's in like the second scene. He's in the first 5 minutes. And I was like, oh, this is going to be a really important character. And then you see him one more time in the second half for like a minute. I was like, that's it? Like, I feel like that should have been a character who could have become more like, Bobby could have had a best friend or someone like that's in the movie more. I just felt like there could have been at least one more person. I don't know. At least a few more scenes.
The narc Hutch, he had a bit of a menace.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, there's some memorable like moments of supporting characters in this, but nobody really gets a juicy role like the two leads. Whereas I feel like other films like this, you would have two more characters who played a significant role in the narrative. I feel like the movie needed that. At almost 2 hours long, at some points it's very slow and very obviously very serious and no music. And you're like, maybe not to say we needed like a humorist, like someone who was like a comic relief character, but someone who maybe gave the movie a little bit of levity here and there might have been helpful. I don't know.
Or like a way out, if it was someone who's like if Kitty's character had a sister or brother and was like, I need to get you out of here. Like
maybe added some conflict and tension. I wrote that twice. The film needs more tension. There needs to be, doesn't need to be a standard 3-act structure plot, but I'm like, I feel like we need something more to kind of, keep this going. Like, for this long, an hour and 52 minutes or whatever the film is, I just felt like we start to get that at the end when there's this thing like, oh, is she gonna turn him in? Like there starts to become some tension-filled scenes in the last 20 minutes, but before that, it's very episodic, right? It's just a lot of things happen, they react, something else happens, they react. I feel like a lot of that is this movie, and that's where I struggled with it a little bit. This is not a film I see myself ever rewatching. I think that was a one and done, but it's one I feel like you have to look at if you're a fan of Pacino, because this is the one that really made him a star. Without this movie, he's not in The Godfather, and who knows? I mean, I think he would have had a great career if he had not appeared in The Godfather. It was going to happen, but obviously his participation in The Godfather really sets off his career in the 70s. So before my final question, Harrison, anything else you wanted to mention about the movie? As I said before, I love the ending. I really stick with it, and you have a really fantastic ending. Not only what happens to Bobby at the end, but then we get this little epilogue scene that was really the way that is shot with the camera tracking.
Yeah.
And like the last line of the movie that said, and then cut to black. I was like, that was great. That was really like a fantastic way to end this film. Right.
Yeah, I thought it was a perfect ending, one that you're like, you would dream of if you were writing a novel or a story, right?
It leaves you wondering. It's not definitive, but you there's a sense of like optimism there that you need after 2 hours of this. Like that it ended with them just committing suicide.
I don't know if it's optimistic. It's kind of saying like, I don't want to spoil it, but it felt like the cycle is continuing.
True. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I read it as like, I read it as a little bit more like they're gonna be okay. You didn't read it that way? You read it as just what we just watched going to happen again?
I'm I made the West is in drought and the glass is half empty.
Okay.
So yeah.
I don't know. There's just a sweetness to that last shot that I liked a lot. So whatever happens to them, we'll never know. But I like that ending a lot. I think if it had ended the scene before, I wouldn't have been as positive about the movie in general. I think we needed that little epilogue. Let's see. Anything else? Oh, there's a lovely scene of them on the rooftop, and I believe that's where the poster comes from, like that you've seen, that we've seen online. Them sitting, and I think it's mostly done in just one take of them just kind of holding each other on a rooftop. Beautiful scene. Like I love the cinematography in that part too. And then the scene where they're preparing the cocaine, I thought was really well done, even if the editing was a little bit out of balance with the rest of the movie. There's like a lot of moments here that click and that I really like, and Pacino and Wynn are great. So it's worth a look. Just don't expect to have a fantastic time watching it.
Right.
What would be your summation of this thing?
Yeah, it's like it's the same subject matter as Requiem for a Dream.
Yeah.
But it's not a roller coaster, no.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's much more like documentary-like, much slower, but worth a look if you're interested in this cast and this subject matter, to be sure. So my last question, Harrison, I ask of each guest, as I've asked you before, like if they were to make this in 2021, like what would have to change? What would be different? Anything stay the same? I mean, Al Pacino could come back. We could do it again with Al. He's still working. He just wrapped a film with Ridley Scott called House of Gucci, coming out in the fall of 2021, which I'm very excited about. Lady Gaga, her first role after A Star Is Born. So he's still hard at work. I watched his show Hunters on Amazon Prime, last year? I mean, so he's still actively working. Might be a little too old for the role now. So I think we need a fresh face for a second go around. I don't know if this movie is well known enough that they would bring it back. I don't know if enough people know the title.
Yeah, but I think you could.
But how would it be different?
Yeah, you could totally do it today.
Yeah.
There's the same types of drug crises today. You could set it in San Francisco.
Yeah. Doesn't have to be New York.
Doesn't have to be New York. It could be almost any city.
Could be Reno, Nevada.
Yeah, could be. But yeah, I think the way you'd change it is that you'd speed it up. You'd have more conflict. You'd have like a relative character from one of their families kind of try to intervene.
We'd see the dog fall in the water.
Yeah, you might have a plot where they try to get clean and then fail. These are all like things that The Wire did with the addict.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you could do it, but it would be 90 minutes, and it would have a few more character things. It would be 3 acts,
and it would premiere in 4,000 screens, movie theaters all around the country.
No, I'm thinking this is like a Telluride or Toronto.
This is or like an HBO movie or something. I feel like the title has a little bit of value. Like I feel like there would be some, some people who'd remember.
Yeah.
The Panic. Needles. I mean, I don't know. I feel like there have been so many great like drug addiction movies since 71. You'd have to do something to make it new and fresh. If you were to just do the same kind of plot as the 71 movie, people would be like, we've seen this before. I feel like you'd have to do something new and original with this after something like Train Spotting, Requiem for a Dream. I looked at, there was a list of 10 films I was familiar with that had drug addiction as a part of the plot. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's been done a lot, very, very, very well. So what do you bring new to it in 2021? It'd have to be something, kind of daring and unusual. And you'd have to get just a dynamic cast. The 2 actors would have to be great. Like, I don't know if you saw Cherry, which is on Apple TV, came out in February. And a part of that movie is he and his girlfriend, the guy's played by Tom Holland, Spider-Man himself. Tom Holland, right? Yeah. They get addicted to drugs like in the second half of the movie, and it's like a good chunk of the film. And I really actually like that movie a lot. There's a lot of style. It's the same directors of Avengers Endgame and some of those Marvel movies, and they do this like this kind of smaller film. But there's a lot of style, but it was hard to buy into the drug addict part because the actors are just, they're so young. You know, I was like trying. I'm like, if those two were to do Panic in Needle Park 2021, I don't think it would work as well. So you'd have to find just the right cast. I think they needed to be 5 to 7 years older in that movie to make it really work great. I don't know.
Right, like one way that it's been done to keep it fresh is like changing the time period, right? So like the Nick, which was on
with Clive Owen.
Yeah, Clive Owen is a doctor at a hospital in New York in 1899, and he's addicted to cocaine.
Oh, yeah.
And it's sort of loosely based on like Freud, who was also addicted to cocaine in the early days of cocaine. So, and in that show, it does addiction really well at a time that you don't think about addiction being a problem, besides like alcoholism. But
yeah, that's a good point. I mean, you have diversity, right? You could make this cast more diverse. You could set it in a different time period. Instead of setting it today, you could do it in 70, 71. You could do it, 100 years ago, because I feel like if you're going to keep the plot mostly the same, you can't just modernize it, make it 2021. It's like, okay, we've seen this before in television and in film.
Right.
So you'd have to do something interesting there.
A studio exec might mandate that there's some cartel subplot.
Yeah, exactly. And the character that Raul Julia played, and the character that Paul Sorvino played should be in it more. I don't know.
Yes.
But I mean, every film we talk about, I'm like, I could see someone doing something with this. It's all about, we're living in a world of IP. It's like, are people aware of such and such property? Like maybe they'll do it again. I don't think this one will get a remake.
It's like you never know. Like Dog Day Afternoon would totally be remade as a TV movie.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of films outside of the horror genre in the 70s are not touched. Like they don't remake. I mean, outside of horror films, I mean, I don't know if I can think of a dramatic film released between.
The 80s have all been remade, right? But the 70s, I guess that's the next frontier.
Because the films of the 70s, the dramas are so character driven, right? They're more like based on character, and they're focused on, these quiet stories. It's like people today, the higher ups think that audiences don't want to see that. So, they'll go with something a little flashier, which is what we got a lot more of like in the 80s. Right. So yeah, so we'll see. But I think, just like with Shaft, right, there's just a lot of great period work in Panic in Needle Park that I just don't think would translate very well to today. So I think this one might stay in the past, and that's okay. But it's, as I said before, it's an important film to at least be aware of, to kind of look at, even if you don't watch the whole thing, like for the trajectory of Al Pacino's film career. It's so fascinating to see him in this early work. So anything else to say about Panic in Needle Park before we move on to our last two segments?
No.
We have said what needs to be said, ladies and gentlemen. So if it sounds like a movie up your alley, check it out. I would give it like a solid 3 out of 4. Like I wouldn't give it higher than that. As I said before, it's not the most enjoyable go around, but it's worth a look. I think if you're interested in film history, this is definitely one that you should check out. All right, so our final two segments. The first one is called The Divine Double Feature. We pick a more modern film to pair with this. So what was your more modern film? I went with a very obvious one. Let's see if yours is different.
Well, mine might be related to your obvious one. So I picked Pi.
Oh.
But
you didn't go so obvious like I was going to say with the other Aronofsky movie. So his first movie, Pi, from 1998. Why do you think that would make a good pairing with Panic in Needle Park?
In Pi, Pi is not about addiction, but it is about mental illness in a way, and it's very opposite to this movie because it's very kinetic, very quick cuts, gonzo 90s like filmmaking,
very low budget, right? Like
very low budget,
crazy low budget.
Also it shows the New York milieu that's very realistic to that time period, very diverse, and it's inspired. If you look at like Mr. Robot, same kind of filmmaking of New York, done like 20 years after Pi.
Yeah.
So for the way that Pi encapsulates and like uses real New York as a setting, and it, I think that aspect, and then the way that it's the sort of the opposite of this movie in terms of how fast paced it is, I would say that would be a good counterbalance to this one.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I've only seen that film once. I need to check it out again. Is that on the Criterion Collection? I want to say maybe. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's like on Prime, like most of the time.
Okay, it's on Prime.
Yeah,
because it's I mean, I remember it not being kind of like Panic. It's not like an easy watch, but you can like really see a filmmaker like trying something ambitious and new. And in 1998, right, that was like a really memorable, striking indie film that kind of came on the scene. That amazing era in the late 90s, where all these young directors coming up and doing great things. And that was his first movie. And then he follows it up with the the humorous and easy to watch Requiem for a Dream, which is my pick. And if you go with my choice of watching Panic in Needle Park and Requiem for a Dream back to back, you might be in for the most miserable night of your life. But I looked at a list. I'm like, what are some drug addiction films? And I was like, yeah. I mean, Requiem for a Dream is one of the best movies I've ever seen. I've seen it twice. Like I watched it again like 10 years later after it came out just to watch it again. And it is one of the hardest watches of any movie I've ever seen. And it's one of the best. I mean, it is just an extraordinary piece of art, filmmaking. Ellen Burstyn.
Upsetting.
Ellen Burstyn gives one of the best performances I've ever seen in any movie. And so if you've never seen Requiem, or if it's been 20 years since it came out, like I like to just recommend it to people here and there because it is such an astonishing film. And I feel like of like the late 90s, early 2000s, it's not necessarily a movie I hear many people talk about anymore. Like a lot of some of the other bigger like indie films and kind of like the cool films like Fight Club. I feel like, every day someone's doing a meme on Fight Club on Twitter. And as much as I love that movie too, it's like Requiem I don't hear about as much. And God, that's a great movie. Talk about style and the color. And, that's an example of an ensemble movie more so than Panic, where you have not just one or two characters, you have a big group of characters all kind of connected to each other. And you have Jared Leto and Jennifer Connelly and Marlon Wayans, and they're just all so great. And the last 20 minutes or 30 minutes, whatever, it's so hard to watch. But, I think it'd be an interesting experiment to look at this very kind of like, in terms of like the shooting and the editing, it's very low key in Panic. And then 30 years later to see kind of the evolution of film and what really filmmakers could do 30 years on with cinematography, with editing, with music, and the way that Requiem was put together is so shocking and startling and inspiring, I think, for any creative person to watch that movie. As hard as it is to watch. You should also
start with Reefer Madness then.
Yes.
If you want to be a completist, have a trilogy.
Now, if you're like that, there's no way I could ever in a million years do that double feature, then after Panic, watch like a Will Ferrell comic.
Oh yeah.
Like to just laugh or something. I don't know.
Talladega Nights or something. Yeah.
Talladega Nights. Yeah. Like the absolute dumbest movie that Will Ferrell ever made. You can follow Panic up with that. So it's up to you. I don't know. But I mean, another movie about drug addiction, so much more style in Requiem, but it's such an interesting pairing with Panic, right? Like to see a similar subject matter done by two different directors, much different style. Really interesting. All right, so our final segment, Harrison, Beyond the Flick, talking about a big one today, Mr. Al Pacino. What are your favorite films of Al Pacino, of his long 50+ year career in film and television?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to go with two obvious ones and one more or less obvious. But
okay, good.
So like Godfather 2, Scarface, and The Insider.
Okay. Godfather 2 over Godfather.
Oh, yeah, it's way better.
That's so interesting. I've had so many people say that to me, and I've never bought into it. I prefer the original. I like Panic. I admire Godfather 2 more than I really love it and get swept up into it because of the alternate timelines, the back and forth. I admire it. I like it. Godfather 1, in terms of like its trajectory and the narrative, it's just, for me, it's so much more immersive. I don't know.
I'm not saying that Godfather 1 isn't perfect, because it is, but
yeah.
I always find it really impressive the way it shows, it takes Godfather and shows how that would play out.
Yeah.
While also explaining why it plays out that way with those flashbacks to Ellis Island and Sicily and all that stuff. So
yeah, it's kind of hard, right? Because in some ways it's almost like one complete story, looking at Godfather 1 and 2 just back to back. You kind of have to watch it all. It's all kind of the one. I mean, he made it very soon after. Godfather 1 came out in 72 and part 2 is 74. And he made a movie in between, a great movie called The Conversation. So Coppola was definitely firing all cylinders in the early 70s there.
Also, aren't you in support of a movie that showcases the Reno Tahoe area?
No. Yes, we do we get Reno too? We get Tahoe.
They name check Reno.
Oh, they name check
Reno.
Reno.
Mostly in Tahoe, yeah.
Yeah, that's probably the most famous film that has part of it shot on Lake Tahoe, right? So that's cool. No, I like part 2, and it's funny. Every 5 to 10 years, I'll just sit with all 3 movies. I know we don't talk about 3 very much. I do want to see the new version. Were you the one who told me about that, or someone on the show told me?
I think I told you about it on the show.
Yeah,
I liked the
there's a new version. Yeah,
of The Godfather 3. I thought it was a lot better than the first version, the theatrical version. Yeah.
Watch Coppola in the next 2-3 years. He's like, you know what? I'm gonna go back and recut Godfather 1 and 2. I'm gonna do a new version. Like, no, stop. Get him out of the editing booth. Yeah, those are great titles. So you would say The Insider is the one of those 3 that maybe not enough people have seen. What do you love about The Insider?
I think The Insider is one of the. I think a lot of people think that it's one of the best movies about journalism.
Yes.
And Al Pacino plays the CBS journalist that recruits Russell Crowe into being a whistleblower about the tobacco industry, which was covering up the fact that, surprise, surprise, cigarettes cause cancer. So the way that it showcases like how to work with a source, but at the same time, Al Pacino's character is, taking advantage of Russell Crowe's life and safety for the story that is for the greater good, but you see the impact on his family, and it's really well done. And Michael Mann is always a stylish director.
Yeah.
So I think that's like one of the last great Al Pacino movies.
Yeah, I was looking at his filmography post 99. I'm like, okay, what has he been in post 99 that I think is really great? And it's really The Irishman. 2000 to 2018, he's in almost a film a year. He's in a lot, and I'm like, couple of these are okay. So you're not going to pick Adam Sandler, Jack and Jill for the top 3 Al Pacino movies?
No.
A movie I never saw. That's one I skipped.
That movie is infamous because it has a scene where he's basically in a commercial for Dunkin' Donuts, right?
Right. Oh, Pacino?
Al Pacino, Dunkachino or something.
Dunkachino?
I've seen clips on the internet. I've never watched the movie, but that one's infamous because it's basically product placement the whole time.
Is that the film where Pacino's career really jumped the shark, was Jack and Jill?
I don't know. I think he faded into the background, right? I mean, he's had roles. He was in like an Insomnia.
Okay. I take that back. I take that. I did write down Irishman and Insomnia. Insomnia from 2002 with Robin Williams, directed by Christopher Nolan. That's a great film too. So after 02.
Yeah. He's a good villain in Ocean's 13.
Okay, yeah.
But that's an ensemble movie, and you need someone of that star to be the superior villain to Andy Garcia, right?
I was never huge into the Oceans movies. I like the first one the best. Parts 2 and 3, I think I saw both of them once, and I've just never watched them again.
I think they're worth looking back at. Yeah, and Oceans 12
I'll do
an
Ocean. No, it's not.
Yeah, it is.
Oceans 12, you think is really good?
Oh yeah.
I checked out. I remember I saw it opening weekend, and the part where they look at Julia Roberts and they say, "Oh, you look like Julia Roberts." my
Isn't that
brain
the
was
funniest
like,
thing ever?
my brain was like,
Yeah.
but you look like George Clooney. You look like Brad Pitt. That makes no sense. That was the scene I remember where I just checked out. I was like, nope.
Overthinking it. Yeah.
Overthinking. All right.
It's like BoJack Horseman, and they talk about Brad Pitt and George Clooners. Yeah.
Ocean's 13, I have no memory of. I don't even know if I watched 13. Like, I think I saw part of it, maybe on TV. I don't even know if I know I didn't see it in the theater. But I'm a Sandra Bullock fan, Harrison, so I'll go with Ocean's 8. Watch another Ocean's movie. But going back to Pacino, his films of the 70s are so great. So, I mean, I wrote down, I mean, let's see, two of my three favorites are from the 70s. And then runners up from the 70s, we get Serpico, Godfather 2. Other films of his I really like or love are Dick Tracy. He's so great in Dick Tracy. Got an Oscar nomination for that movie. Glengarry Glen Ross. Have you seen that movie?
Oh, yeah. But I think
crazy good cast.
Well, that movie's more about.
It's an ensemble for sure. It's not,
yeah,
he's not
Alec
the lead.
Baldwin's like 5 minutes, and then Jack Lemmon being sad the whole time.
Jack Lemmon, I love him in that movie.
Yeah.
And then that was also the year of Scent of a Woman. So I believe for 92, Pacino was nominated at the Oscars, lead actor for Scent of a Woman, supporting actor for Glengarry Glen Ross. And I remember, like, at the time, like Siskel and Ebert on their show were like, of all the actors they could have nominated from Glengarry Glen Ross, why did they go with Pacino, who was already nominated for another movie? But, you know, Scent of a Woman, I mean, the gist I read about all the time is that that's not the movie he should have won for. I mean, at a certain point, you have to say, well, it's cool that he won at some point. You know, I mean, Paul Newman won for The Color of Money. Sometimes they don't win for the right role. But that would have been kind of strange for a 50-plus year career for Pacino to just never win. So, I mean, I guess it's nice he has one. But yeah, I mean, Scent of a Woman, I feel like it's kind of essential viewing. If you're a Pacino fan, you kind of have to watch that one. It's not one of his greatest movies, for sure.
No.
Not a fan of that one. Carlito's Way from Brian De Palma, director of another movie I might mention. Heat. What do we think of Heat?
Yeah, I think a lot of people love Heat. A lot of people don't like Heat. I like Heat.
It's not your favorite.
It's not my favorite. Yeah.
I rewatched it. I hadn't seen it in a long time, like in the last 2 years. I think I got a cheap like Blu-ray somewhere, and I was like, oh, I haven't seen this in a long time, and it's pretty riveting stuff. I mean,
yeah,
you know, Robert De Niro is not quite at like Analyze This territory where he's making fun of himself. Like mid-90s De Niro, we get Casino the same year, 95, and then Heat. I mean, there's just a lot of great acting in Heat and tension, and that's my favorite Michael Mann movie. I would say, if I had to pick one, is Heat. And then The Insider, also here on my list. Donnie Brasco with Johnny Depp is a great film. Have you seen that?
That's one I haven't gotten to yet.
Oh, okay. So that was a movie that came and went. It came out in like February of 97. Kind of a weird release, and it just kind of came and went. But a lot of people have discovered that one's really good. I won't mention Devil's Advocate. You don't like Devil's Advocate?
I like Devil's Advocate.
I enjoy it. Okay, it's not a great movie. It's kind of fun to see him play the devil.
No, I think that movie's hilarious.
I got to meet Taylor Hackford once at Loyola Marymount, where I went to college, and I said, Devil's Advocate, good flick. That's the one I mentioned to him. I think he was there for Ray. He directed Ray with Jamie Foxx. I think that's why he was there.
Right.
And I asked him about Devil's Advocate and working with Pacino, and he was like, yeah, one of the greatest opportunities of my life. I remember him saying something like working with Al Pacino. And I'm sure most directors would say that, right? Working with this guy. I mean, he's just so talented. I liked Danny Collins from 2016. Did you hear of that or see that? That's probably the most recent film he was in where he was the lead. It's him, I believe. Yeah, I think it was Annette Bening was the female lead in that. Kind of a smaller film. He's like, he like works in music, and it was kind of a nice little dramedy. I think it came out like earlier in that year. And then Scorsese's The Irishman from 2019, which I have a couple friends, Harrison, who refuse to watch it because it's 3.5 hours.
Yeah, that's
I'm like, watch it in segments.
Yeah, if you've watched Goodfellas and Casino, then you need to watch like the ultimate like return of all those types of characters. It was an homage to all of them. Yeah,
it was really exciting to see a new Scorsese movie of the milieu of a lot of his older films, not only with De Niro again, but Joe Pesci again. Joe Pesci, who's
retired,
basically retired 20 plus years ago. And I think they asked him like 56 times over like 2 years, like, would you come back and do this? And no. Finally said yes. And he is so chilling in The Irishman. I love Pesci in The Irishman. His last scene in the movie when he's older, like I'll never forget that scene. Isn't he like trying to eat something? It's just like really weird and great. And then like easily the best performance that Al Pacino has put on film in the last 17, 18 plus years. I mean, he's great in The Irishman. I was very happy when he also got nominated for an Oscar, just like Pesci did. I thought it was a new side of him. Like, I feel like he's been phoning it in a little bit the last 15 years, but he does not in The Irishman. He's really bringing his all to that role.
Yeah.
So my top,
I think,
Oh, go ahead.
I think The Irishman, it kind of came and went, but it will be respected more as time goes on.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, I think it was heralded pretty well. I mean, it got like 10 Oscar nominations, and I don't believe it won anything. Like it was nominated everywhere. It didn't win anything. But I think people could recognize the strength of it. And, you know, when all is said and done with the career of Martin Scorsese, I mean, that's a guy who's made 10 plus amazing films. I think when you look at his career as a whole, I think The Irishman will be kind of that one of those strong pieces of work he did towards the end, for sure. So yeah, my number 3 would be Scarface, which I saw for the first time in 5th grade. I remember being very excited when I came home with the VHS, and it was 2 tapes. It was like a 2-parter. I was like, oh, this has to be important. It's not 2 discs, it's 2 VHS tapes. And I remember just being like really confused, but really entertained and loving what I was watching when I was 11. And I've revisited the movie a few times since. I love Michelle Pfeiffer in that movie. It was a real breakthrough for Brian De Palma, who before Scarface had done a lot of smaller like slasher films, horror films, kind of more style over substance. And Scarface was a breakthrough for him. I mean, he for the first time worked with like just a truly great actor. And I mean, I feel like, almost more so than Godfather. I almost feel like Al Pacino is thought, when we think of Al Pacino, we think of Say Hello to My Little Friend from Scarface. I mean, it's such an iconic role for him.
It's a mesmerizing movie. And of course, it's like a remake of the
1932.
1932. That was like a Howard Hughes production.
Yeah. Howard Hawks, 1932 with
Paul Hughes' company. I mean.
Oh, is it both? Is it both Howard Hughes and Howard Hawks?
Yeah, Hughes was like, we're going to revolutionize the gangster picture. And then they got Hawks to direct.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Have you seen the 32 version? I really like that too. I saw that a long while ago. Paul Muni is a great actor of the 30s. He's in a bunch of great stuff, and he was in the original Scarface.
And I've read somewhere that they're trying to remake it again.
Oh God. Again, you can just have Pacino do it again. I've said that to people, Harrison. I'm like, you know what they've never done as a remake? What I'd love to see is they remake a movie 30, 40 years later with the exact same cast from the original.
So you do Basic Instinct again with Michael Douglas and Sharon Stone?
Not necessarily shot for shot, but basically do the exact same movie with the same actors, just a lot older. No one's done it. I don't think any actor would want to do that, which I understand, but
well, Star Wars is trying to.
Like you mentioned Basic Instinct, like how great would it be to see in 2022, 2023, like Fatal Attraction? And it's like the same scenes in the movie, but it's like Glenn Close and Michael Douglas in their 70s, but it's like the same dialogue, the same, cinematography, look of them.
I'd pay to see it. Yeah.
Them going at it crazy in the elevator. Why not? I feel like that'll happen at some point. It hasn't happened yet, but film is still a pretty, new medium in the scope of thing. So my number 2 has not been mentioned. It's a movie I love. It's one of my favorite films by Sidney Lumet. Not Serpico, which I also like, but his other film he made with Al Pacino, Dog Day Afternoon. from 1975, which is a movie I have owned for many years. I'll pull it out once in a while. Sometimes I'll do Dog Day and Network back to back. Those are two films that Sidney Lumet made back to back, 75, 76. And boy, I mean, Lumet had some great films. He started with 12 Angry Men in 1957. I love his career. Speaking of film at 50, Harrison, like he had a 50-year career in film, bookended with 12 Angry Men, 1957, Before the Devil Knows You're Dead, 2007. 50 years later, he makes his last film, and I love it. I love his last film with Philip Seymour Hoffman and Ethan Hawke. And so that's a really cool like capper of a career too for 50 years. And one of my 5 favorites of his is definitely Dog Day Afternoon. John Cazale, plays kind of the other crook in that movie, and he's known for acting in 5 films, all 5 films nominated for Best Picture or won. And probably my favorite Cazale performance, even more so than the Godfather films. I love his performance in Dog Day Afternoon. He's just so unusual and striking in that performance, more so even than Pacino. And speaking of gay representation, right? Like he's like the whole movie is about him like trying to rob this bank so he can pay for his boyfriend's transition. And it's like very ahead of its time in 1975.
Yeah, Dog Day Afternoon is, though it's a stressful movie, it's definitely an easier watch than The Deer Hunter.
Oh yeah, or The Panic in Needle Park.
Oh, I mean, I'd watch Panic in Needle Park anytime compared to Deer Hunter.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, 3-hour Deer Hunter. Yeah, Deer Hunter is not one I like to watch over and over again. I mean, it's a great film. I mean, it's it's got such an amazing cast. Yeah, not the easiest watch. That's for sure. From 78. So yeah, I would go, my favorite Pacino movie is 1972's The Godfather, the first Godfather. I just think if it's not in my top 10, it's in my top 20. It's one of the most perfect movies ever made. I wouldn't really change anything in it. I just think it just works beautifully from beginning to end. You can watch it over and over. It never gets old. It's just always so engaging. And just, God, the cast in that movie. And maybe that's, I mean, one thing that part 2 does not have is Marlon Brando. Like he is just so great in the first one. Like, what is he in the movie for? 20, 30 minutes? Not very much. I mean, after the first segment, he gets shot and then he's like in a bed for a lot of the movie before the last 30 minutes.
Him in the other one, the second one, because
it's Robert De Niro.
Well, yeah. Well, Michael, you can only have one Godfather at a time. So I think Michael Corleone needs to be the Godfather. And if
no, I agree with that. I'm just saying, like there's something about Brando that's so...
Yeah, in The Godfather 2, the birthday flashback.
Mm-hmm.
And Brando isn't in that. He was supposed to be in it, but he didn't want to come to set, right? So they rewrote it on the fly.
Yeah. Coppola's commentary, they were like up until the last second, like he was meant to be in that last scene, and they just had to shoot it a different way.
I think had he been in that scene, it would be really distracting.
It would. No, I agree with that. I mean, did James Caan come back for that last scene? He's in the last scene of 2, right?
Yeah. But that's okay.
Yeah. And his death scene in Godfather 1, like, no, I'll never forget that scene. That is just one of the most iconic, memorable death scenes in a movie in cinema history. And just the performance of Al Pacino in Godfather 1 is so memorable. He is so just kind of reserved at the beginning. This isn't my life. This is my family. It's not me. He wants a normal life, and just the trajectory of his character throughout those 3 hours.
Yeah.
Like one of the most fascinating character arcs in any movie ever made. And he is up to the task in The Godfather, as he is in all of these other great movies we've talked about. That brings us to the end here, Harrison. Thanks so much for being here again on Film at 50. This is your 5th appearance on my show. Hope to have you many, many more times. It's been so much fun to talk about The Panic in Needle Park with you. If you can tell our listeners where they can find you online, now would be the time.
Yeah, follow my newsletter, The Usonian. It's about design and storytelling, and so check it out.
Absolutely.
It's harrisonblackman.substack.com.
We will do that. Thanks, Harrison, and thanks to all of you for listening. You can find us online at filmat50.com, and you can check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Until next time, remember, 50 never looked this good.